Hello everyone and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Corner. Last week we were talking about hydrodynamics with some potential naval reworks. This time we're going to be talking about thermodynamics. Now luckily this dev diary isn't going to be too long, which I cannot say the same for the CK3 dev diaries, which seem to go on basically forever. Instead we're going to be getting a very concise look at a very simple but possibly very high potential mechanic in the form of coal and energy. That's right, coal. 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 So without further ado, let's take a look at this week's Dev Corner. Hello everyone. As I mentioned before, last time we were here we were talking about some naval concepts and changes coming to Hoi 4, but today they're going to be talking about the introduction of coal and energy into the game. They want to remind you, of course, that being a dev corner, that everything discussed here is in a relatively early stage and as such is subject to change. But for the first time since the launch of the game, they will be adding a new resource, as every other resource, steel, rubber, tungsten, chromium, aluminum and/or aluminium, and oil were there since day one, with oil getting a facelift during Man the Guns. The new resource will be coal, and to put it briefly, it will be serving as an alternative fuel to keep the industry running. The most immediately important points you need to take away come with the core concept. What do they want to achieve with it? So, they want to introduce a potential soft limit on the current almost limitless industrial expansion. So this could tie in a little bit to the way civ greeding works. You build civilian industry to build civilian industry, to annex other nations, to build civilian industry, and on you go. With no stops, nothing can change it, growth is exponential. They want to increase the importance on expanding and securing a resource base for your needs. I do appreciate the idea that there's going to be more of a need to secure resources, because I do feel like the most important one you typically come across is steel, and the other ones are take it or leave it. If you don't have aluminium and you don't have the ability to produce factories to get it, you simply forsake building planes. Of course, this doesn't interact with the main mechanic I have basically wanted for the best part of 4 years, which is treaties and trade treaties and peace treaties and treaties. But, it's heading in the right direction. They want to provide a bit more interesting choices when it comes to economic laws, give some incentive for a player to consider to demobilize at some point, which is interesting for a post-war gameplay, and that war economy and total mobilization will not always be the best choice. I still wonder if there are any kind of naysayers that think they are, if not fully committing, they are slightly committing to the idea of a post-1945 game world. I'm not saying they're trying to make the game play into the 1950s and you go through the Korean War, but it does feel like they're wanting to cement in okay, the world conflict is over, now we must head into peacetime kind of mechanics. And lastly, they are not aiming at creating a super complicated or overly complex system for the energy and economy model. This is very important because the massive alarm bell I get in my mind is the Millennium Dawn mod. For any of you who haven't played it, it's set in the modern day, and they're trying to recreate cash systems, energy models, transferring of those resources, interest on national debt and loans. It goes on, and really can tank the game. In this regard, they might be an advocate for KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. So, what is all the fuse about? Fuse? Fuss? Amazing. As we can see here, the island of Sardinia in Italy is going to have 2 coal, and we can even see the new icon they're using for coal, which doesn't look like the one from Minecraft, so I'm already annoyed. The base concept. The system works like this. Coal will be excavated just like every other resource in the game, so one would assume that improving excavation tech would improve your energy gain. Each unit of coal that you have for your own use will produce a set amount of energy, which then in turn is used to power up your industry, your civs, mills and naval dockyards, which will all require energy. Each factory will require the same amount of energy, so you should be able to work out consistently, regardless of what type of factories you've gone for, how much energy you're going to need. We can even see this new top bar where the factories icon now has a green bar below it, indicating your energy, similar to the fuel next to it. This also works, however, with an economy of scale. The base energy demand is not going to be everything, because with each factory you own, there will also be a scaling cost to the demand per factory, so smaller countries should be able to sustain their few factories with a very small amount of coal, while making a gigantic Eurasian empire will require far more energy. This to me comes perhaps as a double-edged sword, or maybe a room for a pitfall, because I absolutely understand that going for world conquest only gets easier the longer you play. The initial overhaul is basically conquering another faction, so as Germany conquer the Soviets, then you're in a good position, or as maybe the Soviets conquer America, then you're in a good position. So I understand the need to slow down that snowball. However, my concern is with the miners, where let's say you're playing as a small country in Central America. What if they don't have any coal there? What if you're playing as an island in the Mediterranean? If you don't have coal, is this effectively going to be a massive nerf to miner nations who have a choice? They can either build inefficiently with no energy, because they literally don't have a source to produce it, or will they have to sacrifice one of their very few civs in order to gain the energy to be able to build? I suppose this comes down to a balancing question of, is there a grace period for miner nations to be able to build things without any penalties because they're so small? Or alternatively, is coal going to be so prevalent, and basically every nation in the world has it, that this isn't going to be a concern in the miner scale? Moving on though, let's talk about lower mobilization law, and is it our friend? In the new change, they're considering that increasing your economy law is now also going to increase your factory's energy consumption modifiers. This means, as we can see in the image, staying on civilian economy will actually give you a bonus reduction in the amount of energy you use, while if you move up to war economy, you're going to be using 25% more power in order to keep your industry running. To the right, we can also see some percentages going 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, which is actually the traditional consumer goods. So that isn't anything new, it's just more forward brought. In terms of my thoughts, I do think it's a good idea to offer alternatives to not always going for war economy. It is simply the most obvious choice. I think if I was to add something else, I would switch it so that the civilian economy is not so heavy on tanking civilian factory building. Because as it stands right now, even if you wanted to build a civilian economy with civilian factories, the best choice would be to go for a war economy, because you don't get any debuffs towards building civs. How does it work though? I suppose we should know how exactly energy is going to impact our industry if they're adding it. They begin with a quick reminder that civilian, naval and military industry operate with the factories having a base amount of output valued in points that they contribute daily to, so 5 for civs, 2.5 for naval and 4.5 for military. That base number was then modified by technologies, laws, ideas, ministers, national spirits, etc. in the form of construction speed, so civilian factory construction speed, or dockyard factory output modifiers. With the introduction of energy, they will now have a base output for each of the industry types, which means that regardless of your energy, you will always produce a minimum amount of output for your factories. This is good, of course, so that minor nations who have zero energy production still produce something, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, might still make them nerfed compared to majors who I would expect to always have coal. Anyway, if you do manage to have energy, there will be a fully powered output value for the industry. Depending on the energy ratio you are providing, you can end up somewhere on that scale. If you have 50% energy, you are getting output that is 50% from base output to fully powered up. Additionally, all the previous construction speed, dockyard factory output modifiers will be scaled according to the energy, so trying to stack up modifiers isn't going to necessarily be as powerful as ensuring you have straight up energy. In the image provided, we see some of the percentages at play, such as the energy ratios for the three factories all being at 26.7%. As a result, the building powered IC is down by 0.8 to 4.2 from 5, military IC is at 3.7, down from 4.5, and naval IC is down to 2.1 from 2.5. The country this is taken from is clearly Italy, judging by the 1936-56 factories and 168 ships, but it was interesting to consider that Italy would not have the energy capability to run all of its factories. One would think to some degree the northern mountains would have some coal that they could take advantage of. With that though, we have come to the end of this week's Dev Corner, so nothing too long, more so just showing an initial look at a new resource and an energy mechanic. Despite being a short Dev Corner, they think that the impact from adding this system could be quite big, so they really want to hear your feedback, opinions, suggestions, and other things. So feel free to go to the Dev Diary in the description below and tell them. They do note that they will be back next week to take a look at factions, which is something they already mentioned that they are going to be reworking. So there we go. What do we think? Personally, I'm kind of conflicted due to sheer ignorance. I don't know how powerful energy is going to be as a deciding factor towards victory or no victory, and considering we don't know what the baseline energy output of different nations is going to look like, we don't know if this is going to be too big a nerf or too big a buff. It's very much so open. In terms of the very concept of the mechanic though, I do like it, and I certainly like that it completely shifts the necessity to just steamroll building civs into more growth, into more additional factories, into building some civs and mills to more growth without any cap or any consideration. To keep going with this, I feel this Dev Corner just brings about so many questions. For example, if they're going to add in industry, does that mean that other forms of power can exist, or is it going to be exclusively coal? So in the United States, we should have, near Las Vegas, the Hoover Dam, which, as we can see here, increases max factories, etc. But a hydroelectric dam is electricity. Is the existence of a dam in your country going to provide you with electricity? Alternatively, we could talk about oil. Now, oil is nowhere near as a significant factor as coal is in the time period for producing power. It's basically coal, coal, coal. But the ability to make oil-powered kind of electricity power stations is not impossible. So I do wonder if there's a way for you to transfer some transfer some oil into electricity if you do not have accessibility to coal. For example, I'm thinking of these nations in the Middle East. I'm not sure how much coal they're going to have access to, but they do have oil. So is there some way that they can transfer their oil for a very low percentage outcome of energy? It won't be efficient, the technology isn't there, but it's better than nothing, right? But while we're here, let's also talk about trade, because I have a question on, is this going to change the kind of economic power balance of the world? As it stands right now, everybody needs steel. They just all need it because guns require it. But what if there's something that every nation needs even more, and that's coal? Is the AI going to be very directed towards buying coal from nations? And does that mean that the entire economy of the world is going to transition to everybody trading civs with high coal producing nations? This question is of course dependent on another question, which is how prevalent is coal in the world? How much energy does 2 coal in Sardinia actually produce? Would it be strong enough to power 2 factories on a 1-to-1 ratio, or something else? And I haven't even mentioned the idea that you can go to an experimental facility and research commercial nuclear reactors and try and make nuclear power plants. Could these produce energy? As the game transitions into being more late game focused, I do wonder if nuclear reactors would have more of a position for building commercial nuclear sites. As you can see, this has basically just filled me with questions, but I don't dislike the feature, and it could offer you some very good news for mods that really do want to explore economy and energy mechanics. Having something in the base game for them to base their own mechanics off might be a positive thing for the development of Cold War and modern day mods. So yeah, generally positive, but cautious because of balancing. I have no information, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. With that though, I'll say thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to tell me what you think of Cole. If you like this video and want to see more dev diaries or dev corners, then feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next week for Factions. Goodbye, bye 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 bye.